the Second World War, it was only Chinese men who lived and worked in New Zealand. They sent their earnings home and only occasionally returned to visit their wives. But with the onset of the Japanese invasion of South China, that was set to change. The arrival in New Zealand of several hundred refugee children and women established the Chinese as part of the fabric of New Zealand life. Kim Webby reports.
Auckland's Lee family welcomed the newest addition with a bicultural blessing. The baby is named Lily after her grandmother. It's a chance to acknowledge their descent from a pioneering Chinese woman.
Baby Lily's lineage begins in Guangdong Province, South China.
Ho Sui Shi was among 244 refugee women who came to New Zealand in 1939 from South China. Lily and Rita are two of her 5 children.
She comes from the village of Nam Mun, and that's in Zhongshan in Guangdong Province. She was a very strong woman and very confident for someone who didn't speak English, and she was quite enterprising.
The Waikato and Pukekohe-based Loy sisters and their families also descend from a remarkable refugee woman.
She was Lim Yue-tsin, and she came from Awu in China. She was an incredible woman. She was just so clever, so capable.
Mangere market gardener Faye Gok was 8 years old when she arrived in New Zealand with her mother, both refugees.
She came from Guangdong, China, Shanhua. Her name is Wang Liang Shi. We call her a gentle lady. She does needlework, sewing.
This is the story of 3 refugee mothers through the eyes of their daughters. They represent 500 women and children whose arrival 70 years ago marked the start of Chinese family settlement. Like their fathers and grandfathers before them, the husbands lived and worked in New Zealand to support their families back in China. Our government discouraged Chinese women and children from coming, even banned the women outright in 1925.
In their coming was a special concession, because up to that time there may have been no more than 100 or more women folk, and it was mostly men here, maybe several thousand men. And I don't think the government wanted the women folk to come. I don't think they wanted Chinese communities in New Zealand at that point in time. The Chinese men had to sign an agreement which said that after 2 years the women folk would have to return to China, and they would have to take any children born in New Zealand with them back to China.
The men also paid a £200 bond, but it was a chance for the women to escape war and often severe poverty.
Well, life was pretty hard. When she was a girl, her father died, and so they didn't have much money, and her mother had to go and help other more wealthy villagers and help them with their household work. And she learnt to do a little bit of sewing, but she didn't ever go to school. So for the early days, it was, they were very poor.
Sui Shi, like many women at the time, married a Gold Mountain man.
Yes, a Gam Sanhak, or a Gold Mountain man, was someone who had gone to Australia, Canada or America and New Zealand in search of gold. In fact, they called New Zealand Sun Gam San, which means the new gold mountain.
By the 1920s, the gold had long gone, so the men had started market gardens, fruit shops and laundries, and saved for rare trips home.
They got married in 1927, and he was home for about 6 to 8 months. And during that time, my older sister Rita was conceived, but he didn't get to see her. He had to leave and come back to New Zealand. And then meanwhile she was left alone with her daughter and to bring her daughter up and be with the mother-in-law and the aunties and other women folk in the village, while most of the men were away in Gamsan.
In an audio recording in 1986, Sui Shi described her life as a Gamsan wife.
Con chị ạ, rồi mấy con đến tao mặn khi sắp bao hoán thì cái mẫu xin chi hoán thì mấy giờ dùng chi ở trong in tam phi chủ mày nó bị tam mi cái in này làm gì ra xem bên lộ can thầu tam tông mà yêu ôi lộ trai hey trường đình có miếng cài tổ chân cài tổ sắp chết liền cho lôi gì rồi.
Fay Gok and her husband Joe both came to New Zealand as refugee children. Fay Gok recalls a happy, privileged childhood in China.
Yes, it was a very big house. I think it was, how would you call it, like a big mansion type of house. It had gardens and it had fish ponds, flower beds. I can remember all the flowers were grown in pots and a lot of stone statues.
Fay's dad was in China for the first 3 years of her life.
Dad used to take me everywhere with him, you know, like most Chinese people would say they would prefer a son, but in my case, in his case, I was his son, but I was daughter.
The Loy sisters' mother, Yuet Sen, was also a Gamsan wife. She brought up 2 children alone and had a small starfruit orchard.
Resourceful was a good word to describe her, because she just, whatever she chose to do, she would do really well.
But she sort of didn't really talk about her past a lot for some reason. I don't think she wanted us to know the hardships that she went through. So there were a lot of things, even to the end, I was finding out things about her.
But in 1939, Japan invaded the Pearl River Delta and life changed forever. Yuet Sen's daughters and granddaughters treasure intricate paper-cut designs, a bittersweet memento of the Japanese invasion.
While the Japanese were bombing, I think she was so fearful, and to keep herself calm, she used to do paper cuts under the beds while the bombing went on. And while they were working in the fields, when they saw the planes coming, they would dive into the ditches to sort of keep themselves safe.
All we remember was Mum taking us by the hand and run here, suitcase in the other hand, and just run from place to place. We escaped from Sanwa City to the Macau. Macau was still quite free from the invasion, and from Macau we could go to Hong Kong to catch the boat to come to New Zealand.
Lily Lee's eldest sister Rita was also caught up in the invasion.
係啊，好驚咯，驚入邊驚哇！啲機關槍，you know，猛河啲槍猛啲響，話就要驚我找阿媽都唔顧話啦即係驚我話自己二世都追阿媽。
媽瞓啦我都做到唔見得個你問翻轉到啊！嗰仔日本仔跟到我哋啊，扣到呢槍啊！係咪啊？我都。打嗰個士林啲專人入邊日本仔都打嗰條路一樣咋。
就嗰隻嘅新嘅窿嚟，哇！機關槍啊，可響我食，我就媽咁咪計都走都唔理話咯，一路就行路啊， 去澳門啊，我又肚痛，又唔舒服病，又冇水飲，咁舅父就孭我去澳門啊。